There is no shortage of bizarre scandals in NBA history, and if we're being honest, most of them involve David Stern. Did he really fix the 1985 draft lottery by freezing an envelope? Did the former commissioner force Michael Jordan into his first retirement? What was his role in the whole Tim Donaghy scandal? The thing is, all of these are so well known that they don't even feel bizarre anymore. They are just kind of part of the league's lore. Beyond that, there are plenty of peculiar paranormal incidents involving basketball teams and players such as Ron Artest and the Oklahoma City Thunder, but these don't qualify as scandalous. However, if you'd like to learn more about them, you can check out the video in the upper right hand corner of your screen. Anyway, the thing about the most bizarre scandal in NBA history is that it has almost faded away from the collective consciousness. There are only a few traces it even happened at all. This is the story of stamps, fraud, an NBA scandal, and the Sacramento Kings franchise because, of course it's going to involve the Sacramento Kings. If you have ever visited the Sacramento Kings Wikipedia page, there is this throwaway line buried within the history section that most people probably dismiss as a joke. Even as someone born and raised in Sacramento and who grew up with the Kings franchise, I had never heard about it before until reading it here. So the general manager in question isn't named, and there isn't a year in which this event happened. There's also no citation. An NBA general manager committing some sort of postal fraud seems as if it should be a big deal even during the dark ages of basketball in the late 1970s and early 1980s. What is going on here? Is this thing even real? Things were starting to finally look up for the then Kansas City Kings after their move from Cincinnati 7 years earlier. The team made the playoffs in 1978-79 under first-year head coach Cotton Fitzsimmons. They boasted a dynamic backcourt with Otis Birdsong being named to the NBA All-Star team and Phil Ford winning Rookie of the Year. And then, on June 4th, 1979, the roof of the Kings' home, Kemper Arena, collapsed from heavy rains and wind. However, it wasn't all bad news during this time. Nearly a month later, general manager Joe Axelson announced that he would leave his job to become the NBA's vice president for operations. Here's the deal, Axelson is without question one of the worst general managers in NBA history. He traded Oscar Robertson for nothing, talked his then 41-year-old head coach Bob Cousy into making a playing comeback, had a conversation with Magic Johnson that went so poorly, he decided to go back to Michigan State for another season, then play for the Kings. Seriously, his entire tenure was just one terrible decision after another terrible decision after another terrible decision. Anyway, with holes in their roof and their front office, the Kansas City Kings decided it was time to get to work. The Kings had to move from Kemper Arena to the smaller municipal auditorium ahead of the 1979-80 campaign. This was less than ideal, but the franchise didn't have many other options at the time. In the front office, they tapped John Bagzos to replace the hapless Axelson. On the surface, this was a solid hire. Bagzos had guided the San Antonio Spurs through the ABA-NBA merger, with the team making the playoffs every season under his watch. More importantly, he was seen as a strong marketer who could address the franchise's chronic attendance issues. Things went pretty well in his first season. Kansas City won 47 games, although they lost in the first round of the playoffs. There were still plenty of reasons for optimism with Bagzos and Fitzsimmons running the show. The team was predicted to win the Midwest Division heading into the 1980-81 season. "15 months after being hired and a day before Halloween in 1980, the Kansas City Kings fired Bagzos. It was a curious move to say the least. The team was 5-6, but GMs weren't fired for underperformance in those days. Seriously, Axelson had run the franchise into the ground on several different occasions and still kept his job throughout. Kings president and co-owner Paul Rosenberg was the only person to speak publicly on the matter, and his only comment was, The timing is unfortunate. Nobody else went on record. The media was completely puzzled as to why Bagzos was let go, and it was a mystery. A week later, the Kansas City Star published details on what happened. Now, no one went on record in the story because of a pending lawsuit, but here's a play-by-play of how the situation unfolded. A neighbor of Bagzos approached his mother with a pretty sweet deal, $240 worth of stamps for half off or $120. He took the person up on this offer and gave the money to his mom, who completed the deal for what amounted to approximately 1,600 stamps. Bagzos then sold the stamps to the Kings for the same $120 he paid for them. Before we continue, there is one thing to note here. The stamps had no visible indications that they were used, nor were there any cancellation marks on them. That being said, it was still a crime to reuse stamps. You take from that what you will. We're going back to the play-by-play. After being sold to the Kings, the stamps are then turned over to staff for use. About 10 or so of the stamps are actually sent out. A nosy postman handling Kings mail reported something suspicious about the stamps being used by the team to postal inspectors. After review, the inspectors found the stamps to have been used. Officials from the post office informed Bagzos and the team that they have been sending mail with used stamps. That's it. That's the timeline of events. Was it stupid of Bagzos to buy discounted stamps from someone who approached his mom? Of course. But this didn't seem like an act worthy of termination. Unfortunately, his employer did not look too kindly on the incident. After learning of the stamp shenanigans, Kings president and co-owner Paul Rosenberg told Bagzos to resign. This happened on October 28th. He refused, and 2 days later, or October 30th, he was fired. The team's side of the story has never been explained, but there are a few theories floated as to their thought process during this time. For starters, Kansas City officials believed the general manager would resign out of fear of being associated with this scandal. When Bagzos did not, they kind of backed themselves into a corner and had no other option but to fire him. But why were they so adamant Bagzos needed to go? Officially, the team seemed to assume he knew what he was doing and may have been trying to bilk them out of $120 through the stamp scheme. Unofficially, some mused a few within the Kings ownership group simply wanted him gone. That is absolutely crazy when you think about it. His predecessor, Joe Axelson, made one wrong move after another and was allowed to carry on for a decade. Bagzos guided the team to the playoffs in his one full season and made a series of competent moves, but was let go over some used stamps. The matter unsurprisingly went to court, and about 5 months later, the Kansas City Kings settled with their former general manager. No one on either side ever disclosed the terms, which was a condition of the settlement agreement. It was estimated that the team owed him about $58,000, and Bagzos received close to, if not all, of that amount. In the media, it appeared that Bagzos was the victim here. He made an honest mistake with no charges ever filed in the case. Most assumed the guy was fired by an ownership group looking for a reason to kick him out the door. The Kings had hired a new general manager prior to reaching the settlement with Bagzos, and that was that. Or was it? The most bizarre scandal in NBA history took an odd turn less than a year later, and it has completely flown under the radar. An arrest warrant for Bagzos was issued in Texas on theft charges at the start of 1982. Here's what happened. Bagzos sold his San Antonio house in 1980 and accepted a down payment from the buyer, in addition to a contract guaranteeing a $20,000 payment to be made at a later date. Bagzos turned around and sold the contract to a bank, but never told the buyer, who sent him the $20,000 check as per their agreement. Bagzos then turned around and cashed that check while the bank approached the home buyer asking where the money they were owed was at. That is obviously very illegal and saw the arrest warrant issued for Bagzos. He would plead out to 1 year of probation on a lesser charge after eventually paying the bank back the $20,000. But you can't help but wonder if this was a case of a dude really just making two honest mistakes around the same time, or someone getting caught making dodgy money moves. If this isn't a pattern of behavior, then I don't know what is. Look, we have all worked with dubious characters who everyone knew were in some questionable shit, even if it couldn't always be proven. It's possible the Kings were in a similar situation with Bagzos, who wasn't actually a victim at all. Even if these were just two honest mistakes, a person running a professional sports team should exhibit better judgment. The modern day equivalent to this scenario would be Oklahoma City Thunder general manager Sam Presti buying some discounted iTunes gift cards on Craigslist, selling them back to the team, and then giving them out as roster bonuses. It's just a preposterous situation. Whatever the case may be, this is without a doubt the most bizarre scandal in NBA history, and one that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Despite all the turmoil, the Kansas City Kings not only made the playoffs in the 1980-81 season, but advanced to the Western Conference Finals. Of course, the franchise would move to Sacramento a few years later and not be particularly good for the next 20 or so seasons. A big reason for that was the fact they rehired Joe Axelson as general manager in 1982, who picked up right where he left off by making awful decisions. As for John Bagzos, he would not work in a front office again. His probation passed without incident, and the discount stamp buyer took a job at a cable television station in upstate New York during the 1980s before moving back to Texas and opening a sports bar. He would pass away in 2004. Unfortunately, those involved in this bizarre scandal never ever went on record about what actually happened. You know, basketball was an afterthought at the time, and Kansas City was a notoriously poor market with limited coverage. Unlike the sports media landscape in the years to come, there was no 24-hour news cycle to fill. Seriously, imagine what would happen today if an NBA general manager was fired over buying discounted stamps, reselling them to their team at cost, and then finding out they were previously used. But then, the person in question won a settlement against the team only to have an arrest warrant issued for them on theft charges months later. It would be wild. It would be the only thing anyone would talk about for a month. But the thing is, I don't think that's the takeaway here. The takeaway here is this. No matter where the Kings franchise calls home, they attract comical characters and find themselves involved in the most bizarre situations. That does it for me. I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.